So, hello there. I'm Jerry Lawson. I'm not able to be with you in person at the moment, but I'm going to try to talk about agroforestry policies in the CAP after the current CAP, so that's starting on the 1st of January 2023. It's difficult to know what those are going to be because some of them are still in discussion nationally and also with the EU, but this is the best that we could find out from reading the strategic plans. In some cases, very, very long documents. The Spanish one, for example, is 2,300 pages. So let's get started and explain that this is part of the recently funded Digitaf project, which you'll hear more about on Thursday morning from some of my colleagues. So what I'm going to be talking about is strategic plans, not the other components for the policy work package in this project. But strategic plans, okay, so the common agricultural policy is usually seen as having two pillars. One is concerned with agricultural land. Going forward, it has this thing called GAIAC, which is the conditionality rules that all farmers have to follow. It has a new set of rules for eco schemes. This is money that is available to all farmers. They have to do a little bit more than they would do under conditionality. Then there's something which is still called Pillar 4, which is for larger scale investment and agri-environment climate measures. And this, for example, would pay for afforestation and for planting of new agroforestry areas. So what is agroforestry? Lots of different definitions of that I don't propose to get into, but for the purposes of the Common Agricultural Policy, you could just look at it being any areas of trees on agricultural land which are definitely outside official forests. And official forests are increasingly defined by the greenhouse gas reports that member states write annually. So they have to have a database of which parcels are forest, which ones aren't. So that will be very useful going forward to increasingly identify those hedges, small blocks of trees, widely spaced trees, which don't count officially as forest. So, how did the member states do when they were thinking about writing the current CAP strategic plans? And these initial letters were published in December 2020. The Commission and the member states sort of agreed on the wording of those before they were published, but disappointingly, a large number, 16 member states, completely ignored agroforestry. Only the green ones had mentions of agroforestry, a lot in Germany, a lot in Portugal, interestingly enough. So EURAF wrote a policy briefing seeking to get that improved. And the question is, were our efforts successful? And let's see. So remember, these countries are the ones which are involved in the Digitaf project. So Belgium, Flanders has good knowledge of implementing agroforestry schemes within Pillar 2. One of the things that member states had to do was give their own definition of what agroforestry is. So this is what the Belgian definition is. It's fairly reasonable in terms of the minimum of 30 trees and the maximum of 200 trees per hectare, except it doesn't define what a tree is. Is this a seedling or is it not? Does make exceptions for very young plots that were established with the help of CAP Pillar 2. Okay, no mention of SWOT, eco schemes not mentioned. There's this thing called GAIAC, which, as I said, is the conditionality rules that you have to comply with before you can get any Pillar 1 payment, usually on arable land. So Belgium is good. It includes hedgerows, lines of trees. Belgium is also good because they have an establishment support scheme for agroforestry with a rate that will assist planting, and also an annual premium to be paid only for 5 years, which is drawback compared to forestry schemes that will pay for 10 years. And also, Belgium is very good because they have a target for the area that will be established for agroforestry as distinct from forest. So then after Belgium, we've got Czech Republic, which is also one of the countries that have provided quite a lot of information, so that we have a definition of agroforestry, which you see there. No mention in the SWOT. There may come to be agroforestry in the Pillar 1 eco schemes. They've got good inclusion of tree landscape features in conditionality. They have got an agroforestry planting scheme in Pillar 2, and they have in their targets, they have identified that there will be a total planting of forestation, forest restoration, and agroforestry of 7,150 hectares, of which 900 will be agroforestry. Who's next? Denmark. Haven't got any breakdown. There's no agroforestry schemes. They don't include hedgerows, individual trees as any of these good agricultural environmental condition rules, which is very surprising and disappointing. No mention of agroforestry anywhere, and a very eccentric definition of agroforestry in that it only includes trees that give fruit, berries, or nuts. So interesting, Denmark. Null point. Finland, no definition from of agroforestry except for windbreaks. No inclusion of hedgerows, groups of trees in GAIAC, and no agroforestry target or forestry target of any sort. Although Finland funds its forestry expenditure from completely outside the cap, so that's the main reason. France, the home of agroforestry in Europe, isn't so ambitious in this cap as it has been in the past. You see quite a good definition of agroforestry there in the top. Lots of mentions of agroforestry in the SWOT statement. Nothing yet in eco schemes. Trees, isolated trees, copses, productive edges do count towards the GAIAC rules, so that's good. And there are mentions of 2 different agroforestry establishment schemes, but no areas, no costs, anything identified yet. Similarly, there's no breakdown of afforestation, restoration, and agroforestry. Although there are plans for carbon sequestration to plant a certain amount of area of trees per year. Next is Germany. So Germany uses 200 trees per hectare, so minimum of 50, maximum of 200. There has to be at least 2 strips covering no more than 40% of agricultural area, so that's a slightly different definition. It is mentioned in the SWOT, very low amount of money allowed for eco schemes, but only for the wooded part. So you've got to separate the crop from the tree rows. They do include hedges. Knicks are important in some parts of Germany, for example, Schleswig-Holstein. No more information on weighting factors, very little information on the agroforestry incentive planting schemes, and no breakdown of the 3 categories in this magic result indicator 17. Next comes Greece, who have no real definition of agroforestry except permanent pasture. Includes land, even if it has trees, as long as they can be grazed. Nothing in the SWOT. Eco schemes, possibly you could include agroforestry in these schemes. Good on the GAIAC 8. Because it includes landscape features, hedgerows, individual trees, and tree rows. There's no real Pillar 2 scheme and no breakdown targets. Next, Hungary, no definition, no mention of agroforestry in the SWOT, which is surprising because Hungary has had agroforestation schemes in the past two caps. Agroforestry possibly be relevant for these eco schemes. It's good marks for its GAIAC rules. Three eligible schemes, which is very good, and Pillar 2 and a reasonable target for the R17, but again, no breakdown. Italy. Thanks to Justino for giving me this information late last night. So again, we've got 100 trees per hectare. We've got an excellent definition of agroforestry there and its role. We've got mention of agroforestry in the SWOT analysis, no eco schemes, good identification of hedges and trees for GAIAC, two good agroforestry schemes in Pillar 2, so that's great. No mention whatsoever of the breakdown of afforestation, restoration, and agroforestry, but apparently this is because there's still a discussion in Italy going on between the state and the regions. Latvia, no definition given. But they do mention 50 trees per hectare, but just for arable land, not for permanent pasture. Nothing in the SWOT, nothing in present in eco schemes, but maybe it's coming. Good conditionality, good GAIAC rules, nothing in Pillar 2, disappointingly, and no breakdown for the R17, but since they've got no money in Pillar 2, there's probably no agroforestry in that. Okay, we're getting there, guys. This is a good one. Portugal gets a gold star, I think, even though the definition is maybe not quite so good. Portugal does give funding for cork oak and stone pine as permanent crops, chestnut as well, which is interesting. So there's no minimum number of trees or maximum number of trees involved there. They're recognized as a crop. Portugal good in the SWOT. Portugal includes eco schemes which relate to agroforestry. They don't include individual trees, but they do include trees in line in GAIAC, and they've got money for maintenance support and investment support. So quite good Pillar 2 funding. Huge amount of area of afforestation, restoration, and agroforestry with no breakdown yet, but that may come. Okay, we're getting there, guys. Slovenia. Very restrictive definition of agroforestry, 50 individual trees, SWOT no, GAIAC, eco schemes no, GAIAC 8 is quite good. Hedges can be up to 15 metres wide, which is wider than usual. Individual trees assumed, nothing for Pillar 2 and nothing for the afforestation rate. Interestingly, Slovenia is one of the few countries that actually records a deforestation rate, so that's a challenge for them. Spain, definition. The 100 tree rule again. Interestingly, they do talk about agricultural hectares falling within the national definition of forest shall be eligible for support, providing it can be established that the agricultural activity is not double funded. So that's unique. And I think a lot of this, or some at least, of the Spanish Dehesa areas are counted as forest rather than agriculture. So it'll be interesting to see how that rule plays out. Agroforestry mentioned in the SWOT, no eco schemes, and no individual trees included in GAIAC, although hedges are included and trees and groups are included. A lot of detail about a potential Pillar 2 scheme, but only Extremadura so far is including it, and no breakdown the target. Okay, so there's only 3 more countries to go, guys. Sweden, no definition of agroforestry, very little full stop about woody vegetation at all, although solitary trees are protected as landscape features, but not hedgerows, lines of trees and groups of trees, which is a unique approach. So not much there for Sweden. And now we're moving to the two countries outside the cap. Switzerland is interesting, but it's just developing its policies, new policies. Um, it has long had a policy that all farmers have to have 7% of their land as ecological focus areas. It's got targets for agroforestry in the context of greenhouse gas emissions. And the UK is developing its countries, but it has a very nice definition, and I would draw attention to this one. Yeah, so more than 50% of the area under the canopy is used for agricultural activity. So they don't talk about 100 trees, they talk about the land under the canopy, and that is a good way to go. Because obviously the defining it in terms of 100 trees and not saying how big the tree is pretty daft. SWAT, there's new schemes coming along, and they're launching an agroforestry standard in 2024, and they have intention to increase the tree and woodland cover. And that's us. So, the summary, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. Not a huge amount of more agroforestry compared to what we see in the current cap, despite the fact that the Commission has encouraged it. Conclusion 2, not enough definitions, not enough inclusion in the SWOT analysis, very few eco schemes. A number of countries don't include any of the tree landscape features. Very few countries really have Pillar 2 schemes, or if they do, it's only a small budget, and very little detail is given of the area of agroforestry in the result indicator 17. So, second last conclusion is that rather than focusing new planting, focusing the 3 billion new trees in Europe that are supposed to be established on establishing new forests, we should be focusing on those areas which have very little tree cover, such as the red areas. And there's 1.7 million kilometers of European agriculture with zero tree cover, and a similar amount with less than 1%. So that's where we're saying the new trees should be going. And the final conclusion is that in greenhouse gas reporting on cropland, on grassland, and in settlements, and also potentially wetlands, we should identify the role for trees, and the reporting should be sufficiently detailed that it can quantify that role. And that's the message. The role of small woody landscape features and agroforestry is the future when it comes to calculation of carbon farming and carbon benefits. That's me. Thank you.